So excited about this. We just got in a vintage pair of Universal Audio Urei La4s. These two guys are actually from the 80s, somewhere around the mid 80s, so they need a little bit of TLC. Hey guys, Steve from Fiddlerlight Studio, and I'm just so stoked about this. We just got delivery of this vintage pair of La4s from Urei Universal Audio. These guys are actually from about the mid 80s, so it'd be Urei by then. Just such a unique and vintage sound out of these guys. They're kind of like an 1176 and an La2a, you know, squashed together like if they had a baby. There's a lot of characteristics about them that make them similar to an La2a in the sense that they're an opto, they're an electrical opto compressor, but instead of using a T4 unit, these guys actually use an LDR or LED to accomplish the same task. So it gives it a little bit different character, but much like an 1176, they still have a solid state operation. So they're quick and aggressive and grabby, but they have a little bit of a darker sound. So it's a bit more analog and kind of vintage mojo. Butch Vig actually referred to these as his secret weapon for things like guitars, vocal, bass, and even stereo master bus. So with their 2-to-1 all the way up to 20-to-1, you know, ratios, you have a lot of flexibility here. And they've got some real vintage quirks too. Things like, you know, barrier strip operation, which I hated working, you know, with that stuff back in the day. When I worked in Sound City, we had some comps and stuff that were barrier strip, and they're a pain because you have to be careful what's behind the rack, and stuff can, you know, they can lean up against them and short the signal out and stuff. So it's kind of a pain. So we're going to address that. But the first thing we're going to do is pop the top on these guys because we don't have any power operation. You know, for one of the LEDs here, the VU meter bulbs in both these units have long since burnt out. So we've got some parts from Mauser and we're going to get started. We'll pop the tops and we'll go through everything. First, we'll replace the bulbs. We'll check the input circuitry and power supplies to make sure that everything is where it should be. And then we'll check the caps and diodes and make some readings and make sure that all that stuff is up to spec. And then we'll put them into service and see how they sound. One of the things that makes the La4 unique, and a lot of older analog gear as well, is it uses what's known as a barrier strip. So instead of actual balanced or unbalanced input and output connectors, it actually just has this barrier strip that you wire up the stripped wire for the hot and the common and the ground chassis. And honestly, I always hated working with these. They were always kind of a pain. They were never really a secure connection. They were an efficient and probably cost-effective solution to that. But in terms of just convenience, that's the first thing we're going to fix. So the first thing we're going to do is get our audio hardware that we got from Mauser. We've got some 1/4-inch jacks here. These are unbalanced, and we're going to solder them directly to our pre-cut wire here. And we've got it marked for common and for line, black and red. And we'll go ahead and split the ends, and then we're going to strip the ends here so that these are bare and ready to be soldered. And we're going to solder these directly to our jacks here. And if you'll notice, we're using a specific kind of jack. We're actually using a jack that makes contact with the chassis, meaning it's not isolated from it. This is because in the original manual, if you use these in unbalanced configurations, Urei suggested that you tie the common and the ground chassis together with a jumper cable on the barrier strip. But we don't need to do that because our jacks make that connection for us. And if we need to use these in a balanced configuration, we already have pigtails that are wired to bare wire that we can simply connect to the barrier strip for that application. Now that the jacks are soldered and ready, it's time to drill some holes. And one thing to note about these chassis, this is back when they made chassis to last. These are steel chassis and they are beefy, so we've had to start pretty small and then change bits as we go and work our way up to size until the jacks finally fit, because these are pretty stout. We're also going to take advantage of the pre-existing silk screen on the chassis itself for input and output, so the orientation of the jacks themselves makes sense. Then we size the jack through the hole. We take the washer to make a firm connection to the chassis so that ground common connection is nice and secure, and then we tighten the entire thing up and we're good to go. Once the jacks are mounted, we can utilize the space directly above the barrier strip to feed our pre-wired jack pigtails through it. This makes for a quick and easy connection, but more importantly, it keeps the distance between the jack and the barrier strip as short as possible. This is important because we don't want to pick up any extra noise from all the other components inside the chassis. We want all the connections to be as short as they can be, and this makes a nice and efficient signal path. Once the audio connections are made to the barrier strip, it's time to move on to some of the lamps and the VU meters. The bulbs inside the early LA units were miniature bayonet style bulbs. They were CM387 style bulbs that were 28 volt, and they are itty bitty. I mean, tiny. And like most everything back in this era, these are incandescent lamps, and they simply fit behind these little tabs here. Once you unscrew this little set screw, this loosens the little conductor wands, and then you can move them out of the way. Once you loosen this little set screw here, it releases the tension on these conductors, and these little tabs just swing out of the way. And you'll notice that actually shows you where the bulbs are underneath these little tabs here. And these bulbs actually can get kind of stuck in here, especially, ones that have been in here for 35 and 40 years, because that heat over the years has kind of cooked that surrounding plastic fixture onto the bulb casing itself. So you might have to pry these out. We had to with these, just with a screwdriver and a fingernail, to finally get these things out completely. Two bulbs we got from Mauser were just ever so slightly smaller in diameter, so they popped back in with no problem whatsoever. And then you can just slide these conductor tabs on top of the bulb ends like you see here. And then once you tighten back up the set screw, that provides the tension that holds the bulbs in place inside the VU housing itself. With the jacks and lamps replaced and all of the rest of the components gone over, we now have working VU meters as well as power LEDs. It's time to set these two units up so they'll work effectively as a stereo pair. Running these in a stereo configuration has made it really easy just because of the way that Urei has set these guys up. So running these with a jumper cable here to the two stereo link configurations, hit the switches in the fronts of the units, and these will both operate as one stereo unit. As is common with a lot of analog gear of this age, we need to do a quick calibration to make sure this works effectively in stereo mode. So we're going to turn the threshold and output knobs all the way down counterclockwise, and then we're going to set the input ratios to 8:1 on both machines. And then we're also going to make sure that the meter is set to gain reduction on both machines as well. Then we want to make sure that the stereo link button is engaged on both of the machines, and that also the jumper cable in the back that connects to our stereo link RCA jacks is also connected. Then we're going to send a 1K test tone at roughly around 1 volt out of our test tone generator here into the first unit. This is the one on the left. This is going to go into the input, and we're going to raise our threshold until we're getting about -5 worth of gain reduction. And then we're going to check our other meter and see how close we are. And as you can see in this case, we're a little off. So we're going to adjust this threshold adjustment potentiometer right next to the transformer back here. And as we move that, that's going to start to drop the level until it matches the unit on the left. And this means that both the units will be calibrated to work correctly with each other in stereo mode. So now that the barrier strip connections have been finished, as well as the power sections for each one of the units, and we got the lamps replaced, everything, it's time to put them all back together again. And we'll see if we can mount them up in the rack and see how they sound. We've got a small project going here that we've recorded direct into our DAW and then through the La4. So we've got bass, drums, as well as a synth. So let's start with the dry or direct drum sound first. Next up, let's check out a 4-string P-bass sound, both direct and then with the La4. And then finally, let's see what the La4 does to a synth and if it helps take off some of that digital edge, add a little bit of warmth. First, the direct sound. working VUs on both the meters, power indicators. We've gone through the entire power circuit. It's so cool to have these guys back and fully operational. They just really reminded me of what it was like back in the day to work with these guys, and that special kind of character that back then we just took for granted. But now, you know, that we have the choice of every possible color to paint with, I realized how unique and how special these really were to really work with in, you know, a music production environment. I'm just so stoked to really get these in on a session and see how they work on things like vocals and on bass, on guitars, you know, master bus duties, that kind of stuff. Really excited about this. So anyway, guys, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate the company. If this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. It really does help keep a young channel like this going and growing. Stay safe, be creative, add something creative to the world because it could really use it. Take care. We'll catch you guys in the next video.